Meeting order. Citizen pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We're hot. Ready to go?
Yeah.
All right. So I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda. So moved.
Awesome.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, so we jump straight to discussion items. Cell phones and solutions. So this was a concern that Director Rayner had asked you on the agenda. We've really struggled with students videotaping fights and some general disengagement with students. WASDA has a model policy for this that Sean had constructed a committee and went over with some teachers with recommendations. Grandview implemented a policy, but there's some different approaches. I'll say we can tackle it from a policy perspective. Our principals have really been working on implementing some practical and kind of pragmatic solutions to resolve this. And then there are some kind of novel solutions, I'll call them, that we can look into and purchase. But I'm sure that you've heard it as well as I've heard it, that cell phones have been a problem, are a problem. Kids are on their devices. There's cyberbullying, there's harassment taking place while at school. Everybody seems to have one, and it's just an opportunity for students to disengage and get on their phone. Coming out of the pandemic, I think that more and more students have started to live in this world of social media, and they are, have been and are isolating themselves in that way. And so in an attempt to re-engage and actually, create some cultural differences here that we can adhere to as a group. I think that's what we're looking to do is either create some rules or some actions, put some money behind it that, is solutions based. So we can kind of start out with what everybody has heard or seen or experienced. I know that you've seen some of the videos that have been posted online, student on students, violence, and students are actually there videotaping it.
Falls maybe somebody's willing to sit and film it, not pull somebody off, but that's a whole other argument. I would say the money that needs, now there are a substantial amount of parents that are pro phone, but I'm of the opinion that we get a great big wicker basket that goes in the office of each school. And if they're on their phone, it's not their lunch hour or their break, that it gets taken away, it goes in the wicker basket, and the folks get to come pick it up. That was my opinion.
Do we currently have any kind of policy, or we're just looking at enacting one?
We don't have one for student cell phones.
We kind of do, because back, like, it's been quite a number of years ago, they tried to implement BYOD.
Yeah, so bring your own device, and so that was a trend once upon a time, and it was Bill Daggett's group. There was a consulting group that was pushing that because students, almost every student had a phone, they had access to encyclopedias, videos, things like that. Instead of taking notes, a student could pull out their phone and take a photo of a slide, and it's almost the same as, they have the PowerPoint right there on the phone. So we do about the use. I don't know if that was ever fully realized. I think that it may be an inappropriate term about like the pipe dream or something like this, but
It seemed pretty open conceived at the time. But
yeah, it was really I think an attempt that instead of districts going to a one-to-one, districts tried to leverage that and say, oh yeah, we have a bring your own device. The issue with that is that there were different data plans. Not every student came from the same background or level of affluence, and so maybe they didn't have a data plan that allowed them to get on the internet and things like that, so.
What's your opinion, Peggy?
Well, my personal opinion is just that I would like there not to be, cell phone usage in the classroom. I think that, I think that it's problematic. I just think it's problematic. I think when kids arrive at school, they should be, they should, their cell phone should be turned off. They should not have access to their phones when they're in class.
Jamie?
Oh, I feel the same way. I thought they had a policy somewhere because I visited with a kid out in front of my house. I think it was just the first day of school and I happened to be out there. I think he said he was an 8th grader. So, and he's really great. He said, but I do miss my phone. And I said, well, they don't have a place in school. And he says, well, we talked about that in class. I don't know what teacher was. And he said, the teacher had given an example of a cell phone would be for emergencies during the day. She says, like, I have always had an emergency situation because I have a small child that's diabetic. And I monitor her blood sugar online, and then I can call the babysitter and alert her, so it's not her responsibility. And he says, and I understand that. He said, we're just all used to having our phones.
Well, that's kind of.
But no, I don't see a place for him in school.
You see your thoughts.
It's a rough issue, and I look at myself with my phone out, all of us with our phones, here. And it's hard, and so I guess.
Literally, we're what, five for 6 right here.
Yeah, I mean, and watches, are we to say no tech watches too, seeing smart watches. I want to hear from the principals how they feel about it, what their proposals are. I think certainly the classroom rule is you don't have your phone out during class. That should be the rule. I think in between classes or at lunchtime, we can
That's
monitor
the
it.
reason time.
Was the school liability if you lose someone's phone when it's been turned in the wicker basket? Or someone grabs and upgrades their phone at the end of the day when they go home, that could be an issue. I know there are students that have 504 plans that allow them to record the class, video it. So how do we, someone's gonna be like, well, he had his phone out, so I had my phone out. They're like, well, he has a 504, you can't say that. So I think there's a need for a policy, but I don't think there's gonna be a perfect policy. I think it's a big issue.
About the principals, Crystal and Michael have been kind of working on some practical approaches within their building. Crystal, can you talk a little bit about that?
We've just been taking a real hard line on we're not going to allow cell phones in class. Actually, from the start of school to the end of school, it's always bathrooms, recess, lunch. You do not need your phone. If you need to make a phone call, then you can ask for permission to use your phone. You can go to the office and use a phone. You can use your teacher's classroom phone, but you have to ask for permission. When we see a phone, it's taken away. They get one warning, so they get it back at the end of the day. After that, if it's taken away again, someone has to come pick it up. So it's inconvenient for parents to come. And we get phone calls, like, I can't come until 4. I can't, well, we're here till 4, or somebody will be here till 4:30 till you can get here, or send somebody else to pick it up and an adult has to come pick it up. It's been a great improvement this year. I think kids are just understanding that we mean business, and it hasn't been a problem. We haven't had anybody call and say, my kid needs to have their phone, access to their phone all the time and have it out on their desk. There's no need for that. We have a lot of teachers who use phone jail. So they have a calculator holder on their wall, and as the kids come in, and the teachers is in there too. Teacher puts their own phone up in slot number 1 and everybody else has a slot. So it's worked out really well. Other teachers just say it has to be in a backpack, pocket, wherever, but out of sight, you do not need it. And this year has been a lot better, a lot more engagement, a lot less distraction. Still have some problems like in the hallways with wanting to check things, and And when we take phones away, it's just incredible. I've had one sit on my desk and it's just constant ding, 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 ding. I just can't, like, way more than mine does. But yeah, it's definitely a distraction, and this year has been much better since we've taken a hard line on, we're not gonna allow it. And consistency from the staff has been great this year. In past years, it's been a little bit like, well, it's okay to use it in this class, but not in this class. And we just said, no, if we feel this is important, we're not going to allow it. Nobody is. So it's been great.
So it's an example of kind of leveraging this, this word expectation. Like, keep it in your backpack, that's the expectation, don't pull it out of your backpack, you don't want to see it. So sometimes you don't necessarily need a policy to govern that. You can be governed by practice, right? And so the expectations within the building, they're trying to create a culture around that. Every teacher enforces the same thing. Keep it in your backpack, we don't want to see it, right? And so the question would be, do we really need a policy, or is that something that we want to push inside the building, right? Principals can still take the approach that if a kid refuses, you're being insubordinate, right? There is language around that. So this whole question about, do we need a policy to govern it? I think, similar to like a dress code, we get into this discussion about even if we have a policy, it's words on paper. Are people going to enforce it, or are they going to do that? So in advance of that, we have HMS taking, kind of a unified approach with their staff to say, we're going to crack down on that. That's not going to be everybody struggling with it in every single classroom. And so let's all address it in the same way. So, like you said, there's just these approaches to practice, there's policy, and then there's a separate board. It's called Yonder or Over Yonder. They're these new big pouches that you can put your phone in, and it locks at the top. Kid can continue to use their phone. They can unlock it at any time. You have the unlocking key centrally located. So if they need to go out and it starts vibrating or ringing, you can unlock it and take the call out in the hallway. But the text messages every single second during the class, they can't access that. So.
And also, are they told to put it on silence?
Mhm. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. If it rings, then it's the same as you had it out.
Okay,
Taken away.
I have no problem with that part.
Or that practice.
Yeah, or that, sorry.
I think we said, but the bathrooms, locker rooms, I mean, that's just terrible. I mean, somebody go wrong 100 different ways.
So we put signs on, we actually made signs for all of our bathrooms, so every bathroom has a big sign right on it. Phone with a slash through it. So we're just trying to make sure they understand that these areas are definitely off limits, but really it's all areas throughout the day. They don't have it during lunch, they don't have it during recess. And they don't need it.
Is there a huge problem at the elementaries? I mean, to my way of thinking, a kid that young should never have a phone anyway. But
We do
I've
have,
got a granddaughter that's got one, so
oh yeah, they have them. No, I would say not so much after school in the bus line. They do. Every now and then, they are more the social media. We have more issues with the social media, that stuff's happening at home. And then that will be brought to our attention. At least in my talk about it. But at school, I mean, they're taken away, but we kind of have the same, like, first time you'll get it back, second time, mom and dad.
Jason, your thoughts?
I don't know if we need a policy per se. I do like having, an expectation. I think you guys are doing a great job with middle school, so I appreciate that. As long as the kids know, and that's the expectation in the building, that while they're in school, I think it's fine. I'd like to see it transferred through all the schools, whether it's elementary or high school, but I think it's equally important, no matter what grade you're in, that you're focused on, class time and stuff like that. So if we can do the same thing across all the buildings, I would be perfectly satisfied with that, and then hold the line, accordingly. So makes sense.
So we do have a policy already in place that just barely covers it.
that I don't think we would have to modify at all if everyone's okay with that. So there's just the use of personal electronic devices and just say, it really is up to the school to determine, you know, they can use it for educational purposes. But the school staff retain the final authority in deciding when and how the students may use them on school drive. So I think it's worth just finding that part in place. I think if we're okay with that.
What policy number?
2022.
2028.
2022.
I'd like.
It's just one small paragraph in the whole thing, for the use of personal electronic devices. So I think if we just keep that.
Is it all?
It's the same thing that Andy was referencing, the BYO, just that it was like super trendy. We weren't the only, Foster wasn't the only district were, it seemed like the in thing. We have a couple policies that are unique like that. Like there's a policy that speaks to looping. You know,
I don't know what it is, so.
yeah, looping's where at the elementary level, you have a teacher who travels with the grade. So like a
Oh,
third grade
man.
teacher, that
Is next
cohort,
year's cohort,
yeah,
next year's
that cohort will stay with the third grade teacher for the fourth, she'll move up to fourth grade and so will the cohort. And research supports it, but at one time that was kind of trending, and so we have a policy, a very unique one about that, right? The district will support it when it's possible, right? Well, it's not trending anymore, so that some of these, as we talked about in the past, these policies that are unique and were crafted at one time are almost kind of obsolete in some ways. So
I'd also like to hear from Brian about how what goes on in the high school.
So the high school is a little different. We don't have a building-wide policy that's up to the teachers in our classroom. You know, some teachers have allowed students to use it for educational purposes. We run into many issues. Most of our teachers don't allow cell phones in their class. There are a few that do. We run into burner phones quite often. So if you require or ask your students to put a phone up, they'll bring you a phone, but it's not the phone. It's not the one that they use. They have burner phones that they put in their pockets, so that they can carry their real phone with them and still go. The bigger issue is most of our kids will get on those as they leave the classroom. If they're going to the bathroom, that's when they pull their phones out. We haven't had too many issues. Really, last year we had some issues with the videotaping. We did proceed very much more harshly in the second half of the year. If the student was videotaping, that was punishable to the most extreme that we could. And involved a lot more people in that. So we haven't had a problem as much this year as we have in the past. We'll see how that continues. It's a classroom basis.
Krista, how many kids have you had, do you know of, that have actually used their phones for educational purposes? More than a couple?
With the one-to-one devices, I mean,
Not really a need.
no, they have their Chromebooks, and if they need to look something up and search, then.
And I would agree with
They're
that.
from-
High schoolers, the majority of the kids don't need it for education purposes. They can even, Sean and I've had conversations about kids using their personal laptops and bypass. Kids are smart. They can bypass all kinds of stuff and get around even on those. So you're always monitoring something and just keep trying to stay ahead of the curve.
Is it worth implementing the same policy at the middle school, at the high school?
You know, if teachers take a phone, we do, so we've had quite a few phones in the office. Same thing, you know, you can come get it at the end of the day, if it becomes a problem, now your parent has to come and get it. We're met a little, because of the age of our students, we're met with much more aggressive behavior and resistance when it comes to that. And it very regularly escalates to other discipline, not associated. I mean, yes, the phone is the ignition point, but it very quickly escalates at high school.
there's a couple of things that make that tricky at the building level is of like the high school principal. mid-year implementations are almost impossible, so you don't start off on a level playing field, you know, so. The best date would be coming back off of Christmas to say, everybody's gonna have this rule, but even at that, we've started the year, kids have been grown accustomed to the procedures and things like that, so that makes it run. At the high school level specifically, sometimes these devices are thousands of dollars, you know, like $1,000 or something like that. So either the parents make the payment on it or the students making the payment on it. And then there's this whole thing about like, don't let them touch your phone. They can go through me. And so when you get a high school kid to like cough up your phone, like, no way, right? You can call my parents, right? Or here, let me videotape this. Go ahead, right? And so you're met with a different, I think, where middle school kids in a lot of cases are largely compliant. It's, you know, you get a mix in high school that sometimes it's like, no, you're not doing that. And so it's a battle of like, it's a power struggle. You're about it, so.
Well, and I don't disagree with that. I mean, teenagers are tricky, to say the least, but you know, if we've got the middle school implementing this program now.
Yeah.
You know, as you move forward, you start to snowball that, right?
Oh, yeah.
So that next year's freshmen will have been accustomed to this specific rule, then you can start implementing some of these things. And then over time, it just becomes the way across the school district functions. So I think if we can kind of start working that, and I'm not saying we do it Christmas of this year, but if we start to transition that, you know, to next year, next school year, then by the time, you know, the incoming freshmen or seniors, it's everybody within our school district will have the same set of rules from kindergarten through 12th grade.
Yeah, yeah, sometimes we'll call it a soft launch. And so a soft launch this year to say coming back up Christmas, we're gonna start to, this is kind of the aim. This is the concept that we're after. And so there's no write-ups maybe at the high school level. It's teachers saying, I want to remind you, you should put your phone in your backpack. I need you to put your phone away. And so they're gearing their minds towards policing it a little bit better. And then that makes it easier next year. Like, yeah, remember we were doing this last year, you know? And so like you were saying, that transition over the years, and then you have kids who are used to it already. So, but it's like many things in education, it's like a multi-year process that it's not one big push, it's a lot of little mini pushes year after year that we get that.
Ryan, what do you think the percentage of teachers that does allow, 25%?
I would say less than that.
So it should be
It's not prevalent, to be honest with you.
so if you
And
guys,
even the issues that we're dealing with, you know, for the most part, kids, that's usually how it goes. How Mr. Ellis described it. Teacher will say, hey, put away your phone, put away your phone. But there are always kids who, no, you're not touching my phone, I can have it out, no, and then it escalates and becomes an office issue and deal with it. So, for the most part, most kids comply with the teachers. And it's not an issue.
so if we were to do this district wide, you also agree probably coming back next year is the way to play it, not at Christmas time.
Well, we can do any of those options, and we can do that soft launch that he's talking about. And the soft launches are, you know, hey, we want you to get used to it, but it's not quite as effective, you know, as that, but at least they're getting themselves prepared for it. So I think, you know, and that's for both, you know, students and teachers. We still deal with that about the dress code, and you know, some teachers are better at enforcing the dress code than others, and that's part of the problem that we have is the enforcement of those.
The handful of teachers you do have, is there going to be a ton of pushback, you think?
I don't think so. I really don't.
'Cause I mean, that's one of the things, you have to have uniformity.
Yeah,
So if you've got half a
really,
dozen,
it's a matter of, you know, teachers feeling like the students are respecting them and respecting their rules. You know, I don't think it's.
If our teachers are awesome, and if they know that we're moving in a direction, they'll start to move in that direction. It's tough though to say overnight, you know, today's Wednesday, Thursday, everybody's gonna enforce this new this new program. And then so you get a bottleneck of lots of people writing people up. It just can be problematic and kids aren't used to it, parents aren't used to it. So if we can say we're moving in this direction and next year is when we're going to implement, but we want you to start practicing that. It's more understandable that like we have time, we're going to start to become more strict with our practices, and this is now the expectation. So signage, as Crystal talked about, just reinforcing it, a lot of those strategies is important as well.
It's not in the policies and the procedure. I apologize. Thank you.
Any other comments, guys? Okay, so let's jump to B. That was the affinity cards.
So I put some screenshots on here, really everything's from the website. So there's a couple different things that we would like to just inform the board about and discuss about, moving forward. So Chris is here with me to discuss that. So primary one, obviously, is the affinity card. So what it is, it's a program for GISA. So any members of GISA or future members that can sign up, they would sign up for like a Prosser Mustangs logo card. So it's attached to their debit, it's a debit, credit, like either, whatever accounts that they have. GISA will mail them that card, and then every time they use it, no matter where they use it, they get the 5 cents back. Or I'm sorry, we get the 5 cents back for their transaction. With no limit, they do say, there's a minimum annual donation, so they estimate for us it'd be about 3,000 to 3,500, but it could be 10,000, it could be 20,000. It really just depends on how many swipes that would be supported by, any community members nationwide. So I tried to put some pros and cons. There's not really a whole lot of cons in my personal opinion, just because this would help bring in more money to the district from a donation perspective. As we develop this relationship with GISA, it opens the door for other opportunities. So the high school credit union program, scholarships and sponsorships, and seminars and workshops. So I'm going to pass it over to Nicole. And do you want me to? I can.
Go ahead.
Okay. So we met with the ADP over like the educational programs. So they're willing to provide some curriculum and come in and teach a class here and there for financial health for students, like teaching them how to be good stewards of their own money. The high school credit union program is where they kind of open up like a mini branch in the high school and have students run it. So students can open an account, they can deposit money, withdraw money. It's literally like a little bank on site. So I know personally that Richland does it. There's a lot of other districts that do that as well.
We visited College Place, remember that they had one too.
Yeah. It's becoming very popular. And it's very good for students, so then they're not afraid to use the things, that they get used to those transactions. And then of course there's incentives. So, like as soon as if they open an account, there's like an initial kickback from the bank, for those. And I don't want to say exactly what they're going to do, but we would go under contract with them. The other thing is if we have DECA now, we've converted to DECA. So if they help market this new program, like the Affinity Card program, GISA would be willing to sponsor them to go to state and nationals. So they're teaching them and giving them money to sponsor them. So it's win-win situation. And then of course there's other opportunities out there as well. So they really, what I like about GISA, and I have no bias, I mean, I'm not a member yet, but they're about giving back to the community and really supporting that financial education. So I think from an educational perspective, it's a good relationship to have. Yes, there are other credit unions, and no, we have not gone out to any others to see if they have anything like this. But GISA is kind of the leader in something like this. So Kennewick, Richland, Pasco, Benton City, West Valley, I think College, a lot of these districts across the state are really jumping on board with this, and they're all having really great success. So I don't see much negative, I will see positive. But anyways, we wanted to approach it or give it to the board just to think about, because we can go in a lot of different directions. I would be leading the Affinity, but Nicole would be, and talking to different ASB and the clubs and stuff to go the other direction with curriculum the jacket program. So that kind of, I tried to put some of it in here. It would take about a year to get up and running with the Affinity card program, but there's not a whole lot of barriers for us to proceed with that. So, any questions?
When I was reading through it, I was very happy to see that they would come and do little minutes and that's great. Because a lot of kids don't learn how to teach them at home.
I think it's great to have it at the high school level, so partnering, so that's in the Boys and Girls Club, does too, they have a financial program. I don't know, if there's a little banner bank that sponsors it, but you know, how to like balance your statement when it comes, so I think to like have that and then build it up and have it in the high school program, I think it's wonderful, it's great.
Of course, the days of balancing a checkbook are kind of over. There are still things to learn, so.
One of the examples that they were giving is like overdrafts to manage overdrafts. So with the student account, they actually have, they have safeguards in place where it doesn't allow them to overdraft their account and it teaches them. And so if they do, of course, there's some ways around it, but then they cut it off any further transactions. They don't charge them the fee. So it's a learning experience. And so, you know, they have to learn to make sure that there's money in there. But they work through the students with that, you know, and it's a specific student account. And then of course, like the Affinity card program, that's open to anyone that's a member of youth. So it is marketing students, trying to get them to open an account and use it responsibly, but also for parents, for community members, for alumni, you know, across the board, we could market for them. They're not trying to encourage students to spend the money. It's more so that they can become responsible users of it. And then everyone else like, hey, you can make that 2 or 3 separate transactions if you want to. Gives a little bit more back to the district. And then it's not directly tied to this, but we were having a meeting about the House Bill 1660. So providing, you know, waiving the fees for the bring reduced meals students, you know, the ASB fees. This could help supplement some of that loss in revenue for the ASB. So, you know, we do have to start planning for how we're going to increase our revenues while supporting an increasing participation, both in the ASB fee side, but also actually like athletic, like getting into the athletics. Those are the 2 metrics that we really need to decrease the gap, the opportunity gap. So as we do that, we are going to be losing revenue, and this would kind of help bridge that a little bit, or a lot if it's really successful. It could be great. And then it's not part of this, but on that note, I would also like to look at other ways where we can increase our philanthropy. I think it's going to be really important going forward, but that will be for another day. For today, it's just the Affinity card program. So if the board is on board with us proceeding, I can bring a contract to the next board meeting.
Absolutely. My opinion.
Great job.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Get it hard.
Crystal Cole.
So I did reach out to Mr. Follett, I believe is online, and Kelly Gilbertson is online. And so if there's, you know, before contractual language and all of that, is there any way to reach out to them and you know, kind of fill us in on what it entails as far as the classroom and all of that?
The contract will not have anything to do with the curriculum side. It's just as we're going forward with the Affinity card program, it's developing that relationship, that working relationship with them, but it's not actually there. It's not part of the contract. The contract, so there is language in the contract about marketing. So they have a right to market according to what we allow. So if it's, you know, a sign here or sign there, whether it's in the high school, say somewhere where they can market, and that will be spelled out in the contract. And that is something that as you review the contract, you'll want to really pay close attention to what we're willing to do. But it's other, and then if DECA decides to help.
Okay, so that's their marketing piece is contractual.
Correct.
If we decide to help through our clubs, then that's separate.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. They also provide, I didn't mention this, but they provide all the resources for marketing. So any print costs, design, they provide all of that and the mentorship for the students if they decide to go there. So absolutely. So I will bring the contract back to the board so everyone can review the language as well. But it won't address anything to do with the curriculum, the seminars, the high school credit union program, all of that.
before we do it, it won't go through, it won't just be a fast and quick approval, there will be a. Just, it'll be as a discussion item, and people can review it, and then we can move forward with the approval process. Typically, they do that because of the branding and logoing. So they couldn't use our logo without our permission, you know, and start to market that. And so, yeah, there's all sorts of like copyright infringement and stuff like that. And so part of this partnership is like, yeah, we're allowing you to use Prosser in some way to, you know, like market to that population, to our graduates and everything else, so.
And then the non-compete language would be specific to like the Affinity card program. So you could still have other credit unions come in and teach some curriculum that you could use this as a resource. I guess, are there any questions or concerns from?
Looked like there was scholarship opportunities too in that. Document.
And we actually had one student who got a scholarship.
Well, Victoria.
So we can. I just think when we create a relationship, you know, with any vendor, that's just the start, and then hopefully with time that thing gets stronger, and you know, we can increase the donation pool.
There's I don't know. I don't even know if it's worthwhile, but Spokane Teachers Credit Union, you're seeing branches pop up in the Tri-Cities area. And so they've always been big into schools supporting scholarship money. And so this is, I think this is a little bit of it's a, you know, like there's competition there about who can get into schools and who can, you know, who's a clientele that they can attract. And so I think STCU will continue to contribute just as they always have, but this opens up the possibility of people who bank at Visa, you know, and even if they're willing to give, like Amy said in some way, we have the opportunity to kind of say, no, we're going to go in a different direction. For instance, like financial planning, many districts have gone with Dave Ramsey as a curriculum. This will be a different kind of subset of that, and it allows our kids to, sounds like, you know, use money, get familiar with money, things like that. But it's at the end of the day, that'll be a consideration that we make as a group as well, about what to implement, what not to implement, if we have the staff to support it, what that looks like at the school level.
Any other questions, comments? Thumbs up. All right, so next, we have policy procedure 31.4. Removal release of students during school hours. Everybody had a chance to read through it? Any comments or questions or?
We need education on this policy. How does it work? This is if someone
Yeah.
go home, is a student disruptive behavior.
Yeah, both and. So it's an essential policy, but it basically says if a kid gets in a fist fight or is feeling sick, right? And actually, this was almost really relevant during COVID. We can't just send them home, even if like they live across the street. So we grew up in an era with latchkey kids, right? You had the key around your neck. Parents said, open the door, shut the door, lock it behind you. This is kind of similar to that in a way. You can't just send a kid home without, you know, making an attempt to notify the parents. And it really focuses on the authority of who can and can't dismiss students from the school environment.
Okay, under C, the procedure. So this is talking about parents needing to show a copy of a parenting plan. If you're a residential parent or non-residential parent, is that how I'm reading it? Because the first sentence says a student will be released to the residential parent or the non-residential parent unless the residential parent provides the school with a certified copy of the court order.
Yeah.
Should it be a student will not be released?
I think the restricting and or prohibiting the student's contact with the non-resident parent.
So yes, that means. I just want to make sure we're not like missing a word that's supposed to be there.
Yeah.
So if we double check
I can
that.
double check, yeah,
To me, it reads like it's supposed to be there, but it could also be that it's 7:39 at night and.
yeah,
You're ready to go.
Been reading stuff.
there is wild stuff that goes on like that.
Oh,
It's,
look at,
you know,
absolutely.
yeah, a parent doesn't have, it's not their visiting day, they
Yeah.
show up, check them out of school. The other parent doesn't know, because we pull up in Skyward and it says that it's their parent, but yet. They're not supposed to be in, you know, they don't have the right to take them out of school.
So to me, it should be, the student will not be released to the residential, non-residential parent unless the parent provides a copy. And that's not isn't there. A student will be released to the either parent unless the parent provides a copy.
It's saying basically that they can go to either one unless the residential parent has said you can't release them to the non-residential.
That's
have
what I
to have a
read.
copy.
So have the copy.
You have to have a court order to say that they cannot be released to the non-residential parent.
But that,
Otherwise, we can release them to either or.
but that also puts a burden on the residential parent to make sure the district knows that the other one is not okay.
Right.
Yes, that's what I read too.
Whatever could be clear to make that clear for.
Okay.
Maybe it's clear to everybody.
Yeah, that's a huge issue though.
There's a lot of
Because, yeah. Yeah,
Well, if you fly apart quick. good luck.
good.
oh, man, yeah, I've been in cases where. Similar things have happened, or, yeah.
So is there any other concerns? Is there a way, like, do you have a thought on how to make, because I had to read it a couple of times as well before it kind of started to go. And I know, no offense, but attorneys like to use a lot of words. Just Come on. to say the same thing. But,
Yeah.
if there's cleaner language that's gets right to the point, I'm all in favor of making it simpler, not more convoluted. Harder to read.
Kids system, keep it simple, stupid.
Yeah. So I mean, I know it's a WASDA policy and it kind of
Yeah,
dots all the i's and crosses the t's, but you know, I think we should have free reign on making it as simple
yeah, okay,
as we can.
we can work on kind of wordsmithing that and making it clear. I think that when we start talking about the rights of the student and parenting plans and things like that. Really, instead of saying a student, right, it should really be, the parent will need to X with the district so that. This doesn't occur, you know, or something like that, so. We're, even though it's addressing students, it's talking about the behaviors of like the adult.
Well, it actually kind of is. The parents have the burden of furnishing the school with accurate, up-to-date information regarding custodial rights.
Yeah.
So that's the burden on them. If there is a judgment, if they are not supposed to be there, if they only have. This,
Crystal had a good word. Just make it worse.
I was just thinking maybe if you reverse the order of the sentence, so start with unless the residential parent provides the student with a certified copy of a court order restricting and or prohibiting the student's contact with the non-residential parent, a student will be released to the residential parent or the non-residential parent.
that reads cleaner than.
Yeah.
than that.
So unless we have a court order, then we're gonna release them to both instead of the other one.
That's reasonable.
I have a formatting issue, so look at. This G is a different font than the rest is in Times New Roman, and that's not, and then there's a tab after A, B, C, and D, and E, F, and G does not have. So just pick a format, whichever one it is, just pick a format and do it.
I wouldn't have 100 years ago. I love that. But I get no.
Yeah.
When I was reading through this, I thought to myself, these policies must be so much easier in a small school district like ours and these huge ones. Like here in Foster, when our little grandson was here, if they needed me to come to the school, they knew I was suspended. Well, you get in a gigantic school district like Spokane, you know, I'm sure having to check ID, you know, to make sure they're doing what they're supposed to. And that's what I'm kind of like. Yeah, because of course, most people have a grandparent or a parent or a neighbor that could get the child released.
You know,
Or unable.
I have a stupid question, but when it comes to sports, after a football game for years, you know, we were,
No, to go home.
well, no, you just, somebody would sign, yeah, so-and-so's going with so-and-so, and they'd sign off, and then if you happen to know that Billy and Fred were best friends, and which we do a lot of times, it's like, okay, well, I'll sign for him too.
Yeah.
I mean, that could go horribly wrong.
Yeah, usually they try and have a note from the parent that allows the student to do that. This really, part of the aim of this is so that, for instance, we had, and this was back in Pasco High days, that somebody would show up and say, I'm so-and-so's uncle, and I'm here to sign him out, right? Like says who, that it's your uncle. Right, and so they're, like you're not listed in it was Power School, it wasn't Skyward, you're not listed in Power School. So this really kind of governs some of those things that, how we approach that, who has the authority to sign who out.
Any other questions? So then, with C being rearranged appropriately, this would be considered first reading, correct?
No, first reading, well, this is all just discussion, they're
Also, we would have to bring it back
Yeah.
anyway next.
Yeah.
month.
these policies, as you'll notice, some of them have like some blank spots. These are just for discussion purposes. And so, if there's questions, if there's, remember we were talking about a three-touch approach. That, we'll see it, ask questions, get familiar with it. If we're okay with it, then maybe there's some recommended changes that will first reading, second reading.
I do have a question under
Sure.
A, with a law enforcement officer with the proper ID can remove a student from the school without a warrant, provided the law enforcement officer signs the statement he or she is removing the student from the school. And that parents would be contacted thereafter. Are we going to perhaps consider that they could be, say that there's an investigation going on, or a probable cause statement, as opposed to we're just taking them. That sounds likely for the district.
I'm not even sure if this is, so part of the law change. And Glenn can kind of speak to this, that law enforcement can no longer question a student on campus without the student having either a parent or legal counsel, is that correct?
No, only legal counsel present.
Legal counsel present. And so I don't know that this language actually, maybe, I don't know if WASDA has updated this language or if that's even still.
There's a lot of new laws regarding
Yeah.
juvenile. So
Yeah.
might want to talk about.
Yeah,
They can still come and arrest a student if they have a valid arrest. So.
And this
Well,
is
so-
specific without a warrant, but
Yeah.
yeah, sure, if there's a warrant.
I would come on corpus, they picked up my kid with no warrant for whatever reason.
Or you would know the reason they got.
They, under the current state Supreme Court ruling, they can't even detain students without having that warrant.
So should this be either totally rewritten to say only with the warrant or strictly completely? Do you think?
let me double check it with Sean to get his take on it. A lot of times, well, the model policies are written in. They're drafted by WASDA's lawyer, Abigail Westbrook, and so a lot of them are pretty standard boilerplate language. But laws do change. And sometimes they change so quickly, it's such a fluid process that WASDA won't have a policy in place yet, or, maybe in this case, we missed it. So I can, if it's lawful and legal, then I can bring back maybe some examples of how that might work. If it's not, then we might look at, should we strike that, or I can even call loss on it. Yeah,
Have we ever had language in there to just refer to the current guidelines, like current state law? Or that's the.
That would be far too. That would require you to have to look stuff up.
True, which we're gonna do anyway, but.
A lot of the laws and stuff, that's kind of what it is, it's a coverall blanket thing, but not sure what's in right. Okay, so with the exceptions of A and C, which one's gonna get rewritten and one's gonna get looked into, is everybody else okay with the rest of this? Yeah. Well, I guess get it changed and figure it out and bring it back to us. Which then moves us on to D, which is policy procedure 3246, restraint, isolation, and other uses of reasonable force.
So this is, we do, Eric Flores is certified in this restraint training called CPI. So this is something that we already do within the district. If a student's, could be harming themselves or others. And so this is an essential policy, and this brings us back into compliance with what we're already doing.
What does CPI stand for?
Crisis prevention intervention.
So he's a trainer, how many of our staff are trained?
He's a lead trainer, and he usually trains everybody in special ed department, or if there's students that are volatile. We have teachers who interact with them, who train staff.
Eric Loaz, our instructor.
And so are all the security guards trained?
We don't fall under CPI, we fall under the RCW for use of force.
I have a few questions on this one, kind of right off the bat. First paragraph, it talks about, bunch of acts, and it says will remain free from unreasonable restraint devices, isolation, and other uses of physical force. Is, like in-school suspension considered isolation?
So this really, it talks about IEPs, and so we're really talking about students, some of these students with disabilities. And so removing them from their class. So within, and this is like a short way of talking a little bit about SPED law.
Well, but it says all students in the district, including those who have IEPs or plan developed under 504, whatever, 504 plans. So it includes this policy looks at our entire student body.
Yeah.
So I know there are individual things with, the special ed or 504s or IEPs. But if we're looking at all students, are we gonna basically pigeonhole ourselves into some, not being able to discipline students?
Yeah, it's tough. The state has written the laws in such a way that you can't, it's tougher to expel kids and even suspend kids. Our principals can attest to this as well. So that the new state laws about, we had talked about shifting kids online and things like that, isolating, like, let's say we wanted to do in-school suspension for 20 days, you can't do that.
Yeah.
So really, some of the state laws put us in a position that some of these practices that we used to do, and that may even have been effective, we can't do anymore. Now, specific with special education students, you can't just, because, if they act out, you can't just suspend them. They have to have what's called a manifestation determination, that we have a meeting and say, was your behavior connected to your disability? And if it is, you can't really do too much about it. And, that those decisions are made by like a multidisciplinary team that here's the case and makes a determination on it. But our principals can talk about a little bit about the discipline, kind of what the state has done with discipline and the principal's ability to suspend, long-term suspend or expel.
So I think what you're asking though is in-school suspension considered an isolation, and it's not, because they're not locked in that room without the ability to leave. So an isolation would be if we had a student who was like a threat to themselves or to others, and we put them in a room where they were not able to leave until law enforcement or parent or behavior specialist arrived. So it would be completely like closed off where we could monitor them, but they are not allowed to leave that room. In-school suspension is, you're getting lunch, you're going to the bathroom, teachers are coming to see you throughout the day. We're checking in with you throughout the day, so that's not considered home isolation.
That's what I was concerned with when I saw that.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Jason, this policy comes right out of the RCW, it's RCW 28A 614.5.
I could be wrong, but Jillian might be able to speak to this too, but I think it's talking about the IEP plans. You cannot develop an IEP plan with language in there that will.
Yeah, so when you develop an IUP plan, there's a portion in there that, you have to check if they qualify for the ERP, an emergency response plan. In the emergency response plan is where we address, restriction or isolation. And like an example of one is you gotta be very careful with your wording that only in cases of imminent harm to self or others can these, these methods be used. And there's even a part in there that talks about how long you can use them. Well, you can only use them until the immediate threat of harm to self or others has passed. So there's a lot of restrictions in there.
Thank you.
There was a comment on Zoom about Skyward and the flagging process. And Skyward does have a flagging process that if there's a student with health condition or something like that, or it used to. When I was a teacher, it used to have like a different color box by the student's name. You can click on it and see, like this kid has seizures or something like that. And so it does have flagging system. It still does. It still does.
Anything else, guys?
We get all kinds of highlights.
Well, the obvious one is it has to have our name with that big blind spot.
Okay, so down in the procedure. The page. hold on. Third page of the procedure in the top bullet points. That's page 22 of the packet, but it says restraint, isolation, or other forms of reasonable physical force will not be used as an initial response to destruction of property, school disruption, or refusal, so on and so forth. So I guess my question would be if a student were to pick up a desk or a chair and throw it against the side of the wall, which I would assume clear out the classroom, and then start to do whatever inside I guess, destroy school property, we're not allowed to come stop that. That's the way I'm reading.
Unless they're deemed a threat to themselves or others. So
But-
we can do, it's crazy.
So if I go back up to likelihood of serious harm, which includes property under the definition. So I feel like they say one thing and then they turn around and say something different that contradicts what they said 2 paragraphs before.
Yeah. Yeah, there are different cases where you can. So typically the practice is that if a student starts throwing stuff, we clear the classroom and get everybody out. Now there's been cases where they throw stuff, break a window, another broken glass, and or the kid starts throwing stuff, and it was aimed at a teacher's head or something like this. So there are instances where you can do that, but mostly you're trying to clear the class, and if there is a lot of damage, you're seeking restitution in that case. But it's tricky. It's like case by case. So yeah.
It doesn't make any sense to me.
No.
Considering what it says in the definitions and some of the other things within this, unless I'm reading this completely backwards. It says you can restrain if they're doing property damage to the school, and now it's telling us we can't.
Correct.
How can it say it both, unless I'm reading it completely wrong?
Well,
Because now under the use of force laws, The only time that we can use force against a student is when there's imminent threat of harms
To them or
to,
others.
to them
To
or
people.
other people, not property.
Chris, so you're going.
Well, at the end of that bullet point, it says unless other forms of de-escalation and positive behavior interventions fail or are inappropriate. So it still kind of gives that discretion of, it would be inappropriate for us to ignore this, we do need to restrain at this time. So it's just, I think, saying that, you know, somebody just like knocks a paper towel holder off the bathroom wall, we don't need to go to initial, like, get somebody in a hole for that. That shouldn't be your initial response unless it's appropriate. Like,
If it was, we'd have less paper towel holders on the floor.
that's true.
There's this is so like, yeah, CBI is a methodology. But it's and it's good that we have this policy because bottom line is like, we usually discourage employees in any way of taking their hands and placing them on a child in some way, right? And so this idea of like restraint can get carried away, right? They like I used to be a wrestler. They put my kid in the hole or something like this, and then if the student has a disability, that's even amplifies it, right? And so, I mean, that's the type of stuff that hits the papers, is that, you had a wrestling coach put a student on IEP in a hold and wouldn't let him go, and was saying, let me go, and things like that. And it's just bad. So that we typically try and discourage, like, it's easier to clear the classroom, and if there's damaged property or something like that, repair it. If there's restitution, you can seek it. So it is tricky. And then the state has, as you've identified, there's like almost contradictory language, right? And some of these practices we've seen happen in like real time, like this isn't effective, right? And so you have these kids that are offenders continuing to engage in the same behaviors, and you have your hands tied as a school administrator. So yeah, it's not easy. It's not an easy gig. But October's Principal Appreciation Month. Thank you guys for the excellent work that you do.
I do have a couple more. One of the prohibited practices, which kind of blow my mind even just reading them, but one of the bullets is a student's head must not be partially or fully submerged in water or any other liquid. I am not positive, but I can even fathom that being in a school district policy. That, it just seems ignorant.
We're taking waterboarding away from.
I was gonna say something in that fashion, that it's only used in higher government agencies, but so I guess I don't know. Does that need to be in there really?
Again, that's part of the statute. That's taken right out of the state law. You get a cup of coffee, it shouldn't have to say contents is hot, but yet it does, and there's a reason. Yeah. It wouldn't be in there. if there wasn't a reason.
Bingo. Yeah.
That's why we have all these warnings. My last question is under post-incident notification and review with parent and guardian. It says, and I could be reading this wrong, so if somebody reads it clear to me, let me know. It says, we will notify, or within 24 hours following the use of restraints, isolation, or other forms of reasonable physical force with a student, the principal or designee must make reasonable effort to verbally inform the student's parents or guardians of the incident. Wouldn't that be like rough? Sooner than 24 hours? I mean,
Yeah.
I would think if it was my child, that, I mean, I'd want to know within
24 hours.
an hour. I
Yeah.
mean, I don't know, I granted it's giving us a day's leeway, but I don't want to wait till the 24th hour either.
Yeah.
I know, but we can go above and beyond that.
Yeah.
My thought on
You
that
can,
was.
you can't be less restrictive. Yes.
Yeah. So-
Sorry,
The parents may be hard to reach. You know, all of it should
Or-
be.
It happens in a classroom, at the end of the day, the principal may be out of the office or something, because the superintendent has another meeting. Right, they get back, if the, teachers.
so they would have till the following afternoon or the next day.
24 hours, yeah. Yeah, so there's, I mean, that's you would want to do it probably within the first few, so that somebody doesn't go home and say, the teacher grabbed me today, and then you have like, so what is that story? Right, but sometimes there are like misconnections, I'll say, within an organization, like I'm trying to get a hold of that person, and it seems like I can't, so that's where cell phones, right?
I know we just talked about cell phones. And everybody's
Yeah.
got one, has
Oh.
phone, but I don't know, it just seemed a little long.
Where we can, again, I can consult with our legal counsel, see if there's any way that we can kind of condense that down, simplify the language.
Any questions or comments? All right, well, that takes care of D. All right, so next, policy procedure 3530, fundraising activities involving students.
So this is an essential policy, governs some of the ASB and fundraising activities that happen during the day. So again, this is a policy that should be in place, it's required by the state. But hasn't been in place, and so we need to adopt it at some point.
Is this outside of boosters?
Yeah, boosters are governed by different laws. This is,
Business one,
uh,
clubs for,
it's clubs, and so that is, in fact, Amy can actually speak to part of this too. Any money or fundraising activity that takes place by students on school property or under the umbrella of being for school is technically the students, associated student bodies funds. So how that works is that, like, I couldn't go downtown and say, this is for Prosser girls basketball. And then, sell whatever, and then take it and deposit it in a different account, that technically, because it's for Prosser girls basketball, it's their money, and so that has to go into, it's public money, it's school money, because I've said that the entity is for. And so there are specific laws wrapped around that. About how those ASB public funds are used. And so we've talked before about red, yellow, and green dollars, right? ASBs are probably yellow dollars, that there's restrictions on. So for those funds, the principal has to sign off on it. The students have to vote on, they want those funds spent that way, and the principal actually has to sign off on it. They can't be used on like physical assets, so you couldn't build a building with ASB funds. So this primarily is around fundraising, when it can happen, and authorization processes.
So this would be like the middle school, my middle school neighbors. Once or twice a year sell magazines or
Yes,
gift wrap paper or that. So this would cover that.
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, it's really limiting it, that it can't affect, negatively impact the educational environment. So the priority is not fundraising, the priority is their education. So it needs to be planned and approved and, not be put ahead of the curriculum based, importance.
Never know what it goes for.
Yeah,
I never know what it goes for, but it's gotta be the high seller.
so the magazine drive, I couldn't cut kids loose and say, you're gonna go out to the community during the school day and sell magazines.
Yeah,
They use examples in here like rockathons. You know, rockathons, walkathons, anything like that, that, you know, during the school day. So it's not adversely affecting the primary purpose of school and districts, which is to educate students.
Any comments, questions?
Under H, it says fundraising activities in excess of blank dollars must be submitted by the principal to the superintendent for approval. What's the amount or they should be done?
That'll be something that we talked with principals and Amy about, and that they get to set. And that the board can kind of review that number once we come to it.
I guess this would be a good random question. When a policy has an associated procedure, how often do you want it to come back through the board? Because the procedure is not necessarily like approved. You know, the policy is what the board has to approve. When and, you know, in what circumstances do you also want to approve the procedure?
Good question.
We have a lot that haven't been looked at in a lot. That's not why we're reviewing a lot of these.
Yeah, and so that's part of that is local control. And so my whole thing is that, so policies don't necessarily have, policies are administrative functions, right? But you don't want me to interpret a policy the way that you don't interpret the policy. And so usually we wrap them together and say, this is a policy and procedure we want to approve. Right, and this is how we're going to interpret this policy as a governing body, right? And so, for instance, it would be, an example would be if the state of Washington said, the speed limit is 70 miles an hour, right? And so then every county governed it differently. That if you're 1 mile over, then they were really policing it and you're breaking the speed limit, right? So that may not be the intent of, you know, it needs to be a safe and prudent speed that we're traveling. And so the procedures, all that to say that the procedures we've always passed through the board. Because that really is how that policy, that governing policy is put into practice, which I think is important for, you know, officials in your seat to know what it's gonna look like. And it's really what you get questioned on. You know, if I were to ask you, when was the last time you got, you know, called on a policy? Maybe you didn't get called on a policy, but what you get called on is how that certain rule was enacted with somebody's child, right? A great example of that would be dress code, or even when we talked about tonight in cell phones. And so what you're gonna get called on about that is the principal took my kid's cell phone away and the superintendent told me, you know, he stood his ground or something like that. And so that's what you're gonna get called on, not necessarily a policy that says this is what we're doing. It's how that was enacted. So we've always wrapped the two together, even though it's an administrative function and boards, you know, sometimes don't necessarily need to approve them. I've always felt like it was, you know, fair to the board to say, this is what this looks like in practice. So.
Is there a wealth of guidance on how often we should be reviewing procedures?
I don't know that there's guidance on it, but we, you know, as a board have identified this is necessary. We have like going through the policies and things like that. After we get these essential ones updated, that is we're gonna have to really get to, you know, sharpen our pencils and really get to work about, do we want to eliminate, do we want to like bolster or improve, or, you know, leave as is and keep, right? But I think that you had said once a year, that's a pretty big bite. And so either over the next year or next 2 years, once we get all the essential ones in place, I think we need to take a section of it at a time, you know, the 2000s or whatever, and go through all of them, and then go to the 3,000s, and Selena's done that spreadsheet. I think, you know, all of you may have seen it. And so that's a really great tool to kind of guide the work. But the first one is to pull us back into compliance with the essential policies. And so here's a progression in my mind, and you can follow it. So the essential ones get put in place, we review and update, and then we get into a conversation about monitoring, right? Is the institution itself following the policies that have been set forth by the board, right? And then we start talking about metrics and reviewing, and what are the measurements we want to see, what are the reports back we want to see. So that's kind of what we're thinking. Like I said, I don't know if WASDA has strict guidance on it's once a year. I can ask them. I can say, what's best practice on this? But in conversations I've had with our legal counsel, Macon Jackson Byard, their concern was, number one, with the policies not being up to date. They said you're going to get in a pickle with that at some point. And then number two, when organizations don't follow the policies that they have. And so that really becomes a conversation about how are we going to measure this policy, right? So you want me to check in too?
Yeah, and I'm just gonna raise the same formatting issue.
Okay.
Checking tabs, making sure everything's consistent.
So, and
She's right, he's wrong, that is wrong.
I guess the question, and it's not specific to this one. Just in general, since I'm still learning, like when would a procedure need to, so say we have a procedure in place and we need to make a minor tweak to it. You know, to not delay things, is there a time and a place where we could meet with the principals or meet with the different departments and like, and I guess what triggered it was like that amount. So say we started at $100 or $1,000, we was like, ooh, we were so off on this, we need to double that or cut it in half or something. Based on information we have in the district, can we just go ahead and make that change and let the board know, since it's not like an official approval, or would it need to come back? You know, at what point can we have like the standard operating procedures on how we do things and keep that, you know, keep that updated versus when does it actually need to come to the board for approval and what changes? You know, because even the P card one, same thing, we're gonna have our standard operating procedures, and it's better to keep it updated on the fly as, you know, laws change and everything, and keep that updated, but when it needs to come back to the board for approval, that's gonna delay it, you know, a month or two. So it just depends. I know it's probably not an easy answer, but, you know, I would like to understand better when it does need to come to the board versus when it doesn't.
Well, now we have to approve the policy, we don't have to approve the procedure. We do so that we know what's in it and what's going on. For instance, I think if this one was to come back, like you said, you guys put $1,000 on it, we did first reading, second reading, and then next year you're like, well, that was off. I would think a notification with changes at a meeting would be more than adequate.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't be discussion first reading, second reading, it would just be, these are the changes.
This is what, you know, well, like when you do it, you know, prepared by Matt. I would say this policy was enacted October 22, and we decided this, the highlighted section, we would like to change it.
I would recommend that it's specific to budget, that any amendment come back for, and you can expedite the first reading as an action item. But if there are amendments to things specific to budget, that they be brought back to the board. And the reason I say that is we've talked in the past about, you know, like Craig has explained budgets to be like a planning document or kind of an estimate, but they're also spending limits. And the board signs off on that, right? Every year, that's one of the biggest duties of a board is to approve that budget. And so those are legal limits that the board's putting in place. And so if there's variance there and there's procedure that has changed something within that, it does affect the final document that the board would probably want and need to know. And so that would be my rationale, that if there is an amendment, that it comes back as an action item. And we say this is an amendment as an action item. It doesn't necessarily have to take the same path with first and second reading, so we don't have to push it out. It can be expedited. But the board would want to know, and even the rationale, we've gotten this habit of, and that was a great recommendation. Elisa with the cover sheets, to know what's the rationale for the change. So I mean, this is the governance and how things operate within the district is the board's business. So, but it's, again, that's only my recommendation. It's up to the board on what they would like to see.
It really wasn't my idea, it was a policy we already had, but Mr. Bailey has a question, but thank you. for
Yeah,
giving us-
so if I could speak just a little bit on H. I have general comments and then a question. It's been a few years, so I could be off. But my understanding of ASB budgets is really points 1 through 4 are very accurate under H, very accurate. When we get submissions to ASB, they really should have a plan. So what, like when Peggy, you talked about selling these magazines, they don't know what it's for. Somebody has to know what it's for. You really should have something that you're raising money for. And by the end of the year, you should have spent your money on that item. So if we're raising money to go to Seattle, to some museum, that's great. Everybody should know what that's for so that we can tell the community what it's being raised for. And the kids who actually raise that money should spend that money so that the kids who actually raised it get the benefit of that. So in all reality, you should be raising money and using that money within the year. And it should zero out at the end of the year, unless there's a plan for using that over multiple years. For example, if you have a very large expenditure in a basketball shooting machine that might, I don't think we can fundraise all of that in 1 year. I might spread that out over a couple of years. My question then comes with, is there a need for a limit? Based on that, if there's a plan for fundraising and a plan for spending, is there a need for a limit?
I think there's a state law around it. And the reason I think that that's in place is because at Pascal High, we were carrying an excess, and somebody said you couldn't do that at the time. And so because, well, you're working with student population the size of over 2,000 kids. And so the fundraising efforts were, I mean, up there. And so I do think that there might be like a state limit of what you can have and what you can carry over.
I think there is a carryover. I think that carryover is a different discussion. For me personally, I could be wrong, but I believe that's a different discussion on what our balance is, and we just happen to have discussions on this today versus what's my fundraising limit. I think they're related, but I feel like they're two different areas. And in my opinion, I guess I bring it up because if a team or a group or a club has something in particular that they want to raise funds for, say, and their trip to Anaheim to play in this, that's going to take multiple years, and so they're going to raise all of that money necessary, knowing exactly what it is. I think you can cover your bases in 1, 2, 3, and 4.
I would actually agree with Ryan. In fact, I think you could go take in excess of blank dollars completely out and just say fundraising activities must be submitted to the principal or superintendent.
So this actually reads, must be submitted by the principal to the superintendent.
Oh, by the
principal.
principal.
So I think what they're trying to get at is the principal can manage their own building up to a certain level. And then if it's larger than that, so if they're trying to raise $50,000 or $100,000, I don't understand that numbers.
Right.
But if we decide there's a certain threshold, the superintendent would need to be involved at that point. So with the district our size, the superintendent's probably going to be aware of any of the fundraisers going on, no matter what the limit is. But in case he's not, then it puts it on the principal to take it, to take it up to the superintendent. Which all of these, if I'm understanding ASB correctly, all of them are supposed to go through the board once a year anyway. But like saying these are going to be the activities for the year. So the only time this would apply is in a variation of that. But then it would probably come back through the board. So I don't know. I also would probably agree that it's maybe not needed, but it's something in place.
I just don't want to get in a situation where we're having to bring a ton of things to the board, when in all reality, we know what we're fundraising for, we have a plan for that, and it should be spent by the end of the year.
Kyle Smith raised a good point for National History Day National, that turnaround is so fast to raise money, and they never know, are they gonna take 4 kids, 1 year they took 16 kids? And, they had like 3 weeks to make $30,000. So I want kids to go to National History Day, every single one that qualifies, and I don't want them to have to wait for board of approval. to
And I
do that
mean,
stuff.
obviously, we want to follow the law too, so if there is a law there.
Yeah.
We want to know that.
Can we say something in excess of unless previously approved or?
Yeah, we can try and work on it. This is it's actually a really good exercise. For us to, like, some of this stuff to dig deeper into. ASB law is so, like I said, Amy she can enlighten us about WASBO training and all the great things that she learned in that. And so I know that Brian's been gone through it, and Crystal probably has too with ASB, and yeah, sometimes it leaves you with more questions than answers. Like, how can you do this? Can you not do this? So.
My question about the procedures was actually because of House Bill 1515, we're talking about the procedures do need to be changed up too, so that's kind of what you're. There's a lot there, that we have to. Not saying we're out of compliance, but we have room for improvement, so we want to move quickly on some of those.
We have a couple notes here. You guys are gonna discuss the amount if it's necessary. Find out about the amount if it's even necessary. And then you asked the question about how to bring it back. We already have it in there on a yearly basis anyway, so. Yeah, and if before the 1 year pops up, like you say, if you guys decide $10,000, you decide that's wholly inadequate, then I don't see any reason to bring back a procedure to be approved as long as it's notified.
Okay.
So there's no sense in dragging it out for 6 weeks for 3 readings or whatever, so. Any other questions? All right, so that kills E. We're on to F.
So F is kind of a continuation on, we had looked at policy from Kennewick School District. And so when we left that meeting, or in that meeting, the kind of the action plan was we get together, Andy and Jason had volunteered to get together with them and kind of recraft and add some specificity to the policy. And so we've worked on that. The next steps would be, to consider this kind of work product or draft, and then run it through a teacher committee, teacher administrator, just a stakeholder group. And it may change again. And then bring it back to the board and consider a first and second reading. So.
Questions or comments on this one? We all read through it?
I have a question
Yeah. That's fine.
regarding consent. So how it will work. So we pass the policy. Does it conflict with the teacher's contracts that allow academic freedom? So do we have a policy that conflicts with those contracts? And then is that actionable? The district has a policy that conflicts with contracts of the teachers.
Yeah, so I actually spoke with Sean Mumford about that today. And so the management rights are pretty strong on the district side. The idea with the teacher work group would be to work in tandem with the bargaining unit on some of this and to get feedback. And so his idea that it's probably best to include teachers and not to move, not to move too quickly as a board. But at the same time, he had said there were some pieces in there about presenting curriculum objectively. And so he felt like the idea about, kind of a factual, I'll say factual, use that word, or unbiased or neutral presentation of something, that was within the district's rights as far as curriculum adoption and things like that. We didn't want deviations from that, or people creating their own curriculum around certain topics. Eventually, I mean, we're in a similar discussion around sex and health ed, right? And so when the district's adopting that, we don't want people deviating too far from that. Adding supplemental resources, because we already know it's kind of a hot button issue. So,
And if there was an allegation that a teacher was violating this policy, who does that investigation? Does that go to clear risk? Does it go to
Yeah.
the superintendent? Does it go to
No.
principal?
no, I think that it would, I think that ideally, and this is part of how we try and run buildings, is that we try and resolve things at the lowest level possible. And so let's say that there's a claim, right, that somebody's doing this within the class. I think that it starts with the principal and the, maybe the teacher or the department itself having a conversation about like, how are people teaching different content? What's the standard way? And so I think we want to get to a point where we're talking about like our classes in general, that every first grade class receives the same quality of instruction and the same type of curriculum. And at the secondary level, every, say, algebra class receives the same content in algebra and the same quality of instruction. And so if there is some sort of a complaint, I think that just opens the door for an administrator to start with a conversation, with the department or with the teacher to say, how was this, how is this being taught? So, yeah, that's my idea. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think you should ask the lawyer.
Yeah, we had a conversation about it today. And, he was, the kind of part of that conversation was, is this in a state that we can actually have a conversation as a board about it? Preferences, ideas, things like that. And so his advice was, go ahead and have a conversation about it. And that's what work sessions are for, to have those in the public place. So.
Well, I think this is, this document's a lot better constructed than the one, that we presented before. So I think we've come a long way from that original one to this one. I think this is an important first step that we, have this conversation. And I appreciate you putting this together and bringing it forward. I don't see, I guess, how it affects, what is the right term, educational freedom, is that right? Or what's academic? I don't see how that affects, this policy would affect that. But it does put limits as far as treating people respectfully and keeping an open mind to all sides, all views without pigeonholing, certain, whatever political beliefs that you might have, so you can have an honest debate about some of this. So I think it's a good start.
I also would say, I didn't like that it was added at 1:26 this afternoon to the agenda. I think we need to be timely, to be transparent, and to give board members all a chance to review it appropriately. And I would like to have an end to day of items unless it's absolutely
critical. Yeah. And so I apologize for that. That was, we have a number of different things going on with, and I'll say a number of different irons in the fire. And so because of some of the things that we've saddled our legal counsel with, there are different priorities. And this policy, I don't know that it was the highest priority, but I know that I think that at one of our last meetings, we said that we would try and bring it back to the board in a timely manner and in the next work session. So I was trying to hit that. Trying to hit that deadline. So yeah, my sincerest apologies. I'm sorry for that. This, just so you know, it's not, this is a big work in progress since the last time we talked about it. We've actually had people reach out to us to say, if you're going to discuss that, I would like to be on a committee. And so that's a very positive thing. I think that's community engagement, people offering their expertise. And so that would be the next step, to start to vet it, to start to, reach back out to our legal counsel and say, let's work on some of this wording. Let's work with our labor partners. And so let's come about something that's workable across it.
Any other questions or comments? All right, guys, well, that brings to all of the discussion items we had for tonight. So is everybody okay with that as it reads? Bring it back and look at it. By the day with the room full of people.
I guess that's my question. So what's the next step?
I'm assuming it would be first reading.
I think that kind of what we had laid out was to create it like a work group or something like that. I don't know that, kind of as you mentioned, I don't know that it's prudent to expedite something like this, right? I think that there are people who want a voice in this, and that we should honor that. So, yeah, that would be my kind of recommend that we create a work group and start to try and vet it. And then I don't think that it would probably be right to bring it back at the end of October. I think that we can look at one of the second week in November, or even at that. As an aside, I spoke with Foster Darby today, and they had said that they'll have us a draft of the Boys and Girls Club. They think by that second Wednesday, our first meeting in November. And so that's positive too, that, and we can put it, there's nothing that pins us in or hems us into having, we can have discussion items at those meetings too. Just that we're ready to, if everybody's ready to have that discussion, then we can do it, recognizing too that it's also, there's a vehicle for public comment as well. After some of that work, but I don't know, you can guide the work, like I'm an agent of the board, I'm here to serve.
So would you guys rather see this come back then at the first meeting as a discussion where everybody can make comment, or put together a group to go over it and then just do it as a first reading?
I think, my opinion is have the group go over it and then bring it and present it, and at that time, people could come and comment on it, but let's let the group work it over first to see if they think it's that. I mean, that's my opinion.
We've got the time
Okay, yeah, we got it.
Yeah.
We're here for another year.
for communities.
Okay, so that's what we'll do then, which either way, that still eats up all our discussion items. And if there's nothing else, that brings us to adjournment, and the future meeting is October 26th, right here, 6 o'clock. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.